sticking with discrimination, not to use the very silly term that the guy, what did he say? He called it a double whammy on the show. But I wanted to actually talk about, I've been to Reddit and I've seen on both the LGBT side and the race side that things aren't great in the atheist community. They're better than a lot of places, but they're not perfect. So I wanted to ask similarly, because actually the thing I really want to ask is, when you look at most of the atheist community, what's the best way for me to put this? They're all very, not all, much of it is very pale. What are we doing wrong in that regard? Is it that we're fighting against a more religious, a culture that is more important? Or is there something we're missing? Are we not being inclusive enough? I've had this discussion before, and I've been told about how in a lot of, especially Southern Black communities, religion is the thing that everything is centered around, or the community all ties into, and that's something difficult to work against as far as promoting secularism. But what else is there? What could we be doing better in that regard too?
Yeah, it's definitely a component. Mm-hmm. And I know Mandisa Thomas has talked about this. Of course, she gave a speech right before Hugh Laurie did at the American Atheist Convention this year. All about, for those that are marginalized, people that are marginalized, to get more of them in the community, to stop and listen, essentially, to what that community is telling you. If there's a problem that's happening or something that they're seeing that you may not be privy to, when they bring it up to you, to say like, hey, this is happening, this is a problem, not to dismiss it or to be dismissive of the problem at all, to say like, oh, well, this is not really a problem, or this is not really happening, or I don't see things that way, but to actually listen to what someone who has a different experience is saying. Hey, this is happening and this is how it's making me feel. Like, I really don't want to be here, etc. But it is religion.
Can I ask a question based on just that? Atheists, it seems to me, and I've definitely been guilty of this, are, especially the skeptical ones, have this sort of high, what's the word I want to, a high sensitivity to anything that they can deem as anecdotal evidence, that anything that appears to be anecdotal, which in this case, I think there's a lot of statistical backing, but when an individual is talking about their experience, they want to go with anything that's anecdotal also is untrue. Do you think that plays a part in this at all, when a person who can't sympathize or hasn't experienced anything themselves, they maybe are just drawing straight to the conclusion of anecdotal evidence? Or do you think it's an interesting thing to think about, and yeah, maybe, but there's not really enough of my anecdote here to
I wouldn't say that they haven't experienced anything, because people have their own experiences, but I think that does kind of play into it as well, because if someone is a skeptic, you're supposed to, as someone's presenting an idea or an assertion to you, you're demanding some kind of concrete evidence, something more than just your anecdote. Because if I said that, oh, when I came into this room, there was Casper sitting on the wall, but he went away now. But that was my experience. It's just like, oh, okay, that's you're doing a little. I need a little more than just your word.
Yeah.
How?
Yeah.
At least I would hope. I would hope there would be people that would demand a little more than that. But when things happen, like little comments and little actions that people do that that I could recognize, or somebody like Mandisa or Bria, who leads up the Detroit chapter of Black Nonbelievers, as we see things that happen in the community and we may call that out, a lot of people don't necessarily want to hear that, or even want to acknowledge some of the problems that have happened. I mean, it's been very interesting hearing some of the stories that I've heard from some people of color when attending, atheist conventions, for example. Right. It's interesting to hear, and some things have pissed me off. Other things I'm just like, what the fuck is wrong with people? If we're not to imply atheist arrogance, because obviously, like I mentioned before we started, I just did an episode on why atheists are so arrogant. But it makes me wonder too, then, if there's
almost a level of narcissism that, and I'm not saying this is typical. The worst part is that oftentimes things are represented by the people who are the worst at it. You know what I mean? Like the racism we're going to see in that community is going to be represented by the biggest dicks. And so I wonder if there is, though, a level of sort of you've decided, or you feel like you're a skeptic, you feel like you finally have figured out a way to evaluate the world in a way that is apparently synonymous with reality, but then somebody comes along and tells you there's this whole big thing you're missing. I wonder if that's why we're seeing almost an apathy to actually work on these issues. I don't know, just again me spitballing and me going, oh.
Yeah.
If I was smoking pot right now, I'd be like, oh, what if, like, you know, I'm in Denver, but I'm not stoned, not this time.
Got it.
Yeah.
Denver is an awesome place. It's random.
I love it.
Last time I've been there. But yeah, it's hard to convince someone that, you know, this thing X is a problem. Mm-hmm. If it's so out of their realm, if it's something so far-fetched that they can't sympathize, or even it's even hard for them to empathize because it's nothing that they've necessarily had to worry about, or even it's something that they're looking for, I suppose. I mean, there's common stuff like having an assumption made on me that I'm religious by other people. That happens a lot.
Yeah, I imagine.
That, you know, it's assumed that I'm a religious person. That's just kind of the way it goes with the territory, because, you know, most African Americans, you know, subscribe to some kind of religion, or at least publicly.
Especially in the South. Yeah.
Right.
For sure.
It's a big thing. Yeah. You had mentioned it earlier. It is a big thing in the Black community. It's where most of our events were held growing up. It's just you grow up in that environment. So dinners and Easter programs and pageants and, you know, fundraisers, a lot of stuff took place in church settings. But like when it comes to the atheist community, I've heard the question multiple times, like, you know, how can we get more, you know, African Americans to come, you know, to these events? You know, how do we reach out to, you know, other folks? And it's always interesting when people ask me that. I'm like I'm not sure. Like I don't have the magic African American guide.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to be the cliche white interviewer asking the, like, so how do I solve all Black folks' problems?
How can we bring them folks in here? Like, But no. But I will say that, like, for me, I found the ACA first based on, you know, the atheist experience. It wasn't anything that they were doing specifically, you know, to target African Americans. It was just me feeling comfortable enough actually to go to one of the after show dinners. I didn't even go to the show. I went to the after show dinner. As a matter of fact, that was my first introduction to the ACA and to the atheist experience community. But, you know, being willing to, you know, being an accepting environment, being an open environment where people, I'm trying to find the best way of.
Well, I mean, it sounds like you're basically saying the most important thing is not only to be inclusive, but don't be exclusive. Don't create an environment that a person of any race, gender, or we can go back to gender orientation, would feel like they can't be in. Which is, I mean, that's actually something that that specific thing is something I see us failing to do in a lot of places, especially, again, when you go to Reddit. If you're a questioning Black gay teenager and you go to Reddit and they find that out about you, some hateful things might come your way, even from atheists, that might make you think this community is not appealing. Yeah, so it sounds like don't just be inclusive, don't be exclusive. Maybe that's what you're trying to say.
I just, like, for Black atheists who are comfortable coming out, I guess this is my experience, because I have had some situations where there have been some things that made me kind of question some people, but I won't go there quite right now. But when I joined, like with FACT or with ACA, I never felt like I was, the outcast. I could definitely recognize that I stood out,
right,
among the crowd. However,
yeah.
me being there, in my mind, that makes it a little bit more okay for other atheists who are also persons of color to feel like they can join this community as well. And I think that exposure, like with Black non-believers and how Mandisa is trying to push a lot of that, basically pushing that name out there that, hey, there is a community of non-believers, and it's for African Americans, and these groups actually exist, and these are the chapters that are all over the United States. And it's basically raising the awareness that if you're Black and atheist, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're alone and that you have no community to go to. And so when I am with these communities that I'm actively with, and I do volunteer work and et cetera, I'm there, and I hope that other Black non-believers, Black atheists, however you identify, can see that and see that, hey, that this is a community for you as well, that this is open and accepting, and it should be for you. And just trying to be, I guess, that example, while also paying attention to what people within the atheist community are doing and calling out some behaviors that are there, not in this public, usually in this public way, not like this in the video, but actually sending a message. If somebody does something, which I have had conversations with after the American Atheist Convention this year, I had to have conversations with a few individuals that did something, it wasn't blasting them out. It was like, hey, let's talk real quick about what just happened and why this isn't okay to do in the future. And, having that conversation to where they actually know that they shouldn't do this in the future to me or anyone else, even though they felt comfortable with me or whatever. This should not be done, and this is why. And so it helped them to learn and hopefully help them to grow and not do that in the future, so that someone else doesn't feel slighted by that same action that happened to me. And so that's what I want to do. But I think Black atheists having exposure with that it's okay to be here, to actually, be out as a Black atheist, and you won't be alone. I've met some wonderful people of color that are atheists, at conventions and different events, and it's been an amazing experience. It's been a really amazing experience for me. So it's slowly but surely getting there, but having a meeting as to like, let's pull a few Black folks up in here and say, well, how can we get more of you in here? Like it seems a little weird, but I mean, people come from it from an earnest position of actually wanting to do something about it. And so I don't necessarily slight them for that, but it's always interesting getting that question, like, how do we get more of your kind in here? That's what it boils down to. But
I hope mine didn't sound so silly. Hopefully mine came off a little more, a little better than that. Yeah. I mean,
you're good.
Yeah, I guess the next question should be like, so as a Black atheist, how tired are you of questions that start with, as a Black atheist?
It happens, but I'm down for sharing my experience because things are different. There's a lot of similarities that come across that experience. Coming out as gay, coming out as atheist. There's a lot of parallels that exist, but there's a lot of challenges
that are for sure,
that really jump in place, and that you continue to deal with kind of in an ongoing basis as you go to a random store and some clerk thinks that you're a religious person, so they start talking to you about your church or your religion or something like this, and then you have to have that conversation like, oh, I'm actually an atheist, and you get the pearl clutching look,
I don't miss that about the South, because I remember, we used to talk about, even my dad would talk about being, as a Mormon, like how weird it would be, like when we moved there, this was again in Florida and Louisiana, that it was in polite conversation that, like your opening conversation with a person you've just met, that apparently it was a part of their polite conversational ways to ask you what church you go to. Like that's an introduction. And it was so bizarre. And again, being Mormon was almost as bad, honestly, down south as being atheist, because where we were in heavily Southern Baptist areas, the response I would get from children and adults was that I was going to hell and the things I need to do to avoid going to hell.
Wow.